Hello and good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to this webinar number 38 in Reclaim webinar series from the Reclaim Network Plus. Next slide, please. So just a few slides at the start, just to tell you a little bit about the network and network activities. So the Reclaim Network has been running for over 3 years now. It's led by Professor Prashant Kumar at Surrey and co-led by myself at Laurence Jones at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And the core partners are University of Warwick with Dr. Neria Calvillo, Bangor University, represented by Professor Sheila Mallam, University of Bath with Thomas Kjeldsen, and actively supported by our network manager, Mark Simmons, and project officer, Charlotte Leden. So the webinars are pretty much every month. They're going to run until February 2026. So they're on the first Wednesday of every month, this lunchtime slot between 12:30 and 1:30. And the format is we have 2 speakers followed by a joint Q&A session. All the webinars are recorded, so including this one, and so you can look back at previous webinars on the YouTube channel. So that's a great repository of all the webinars that we've had so far in the series. Just touching briefly on the last one, so it was actually 2 talks by colleagues at UKCEH, but one of those talks introduced the 330-300 greening rule, which follows on nicely to one of the talks today, which extends some of our understanding around the potential benefits of that rule. So next slide. Just a little bit about the membership of the network. So we've got over 700 members. The activities of the network have covered a wide range of topics. So some funding of actual projects, collecting data, some horizon scanning, synthesis studies, lots of workshops and secondments. This webinar series, large engagement events, photography competition, international photography competition, which featured the kind of the winners of that, and a little bit more detail around that featured in a previous webinar. And the big thing we're sort of still finalizing at the moment is the database of performance of different types of green infrastructure. So that will be launched soon. So moving on to the topic for today. So our 2 speakers, we have Dr. Gianni Vesuviano, who's a hydrological modeller at UKCEH, talking about how well the 330-300 rule mitigates urban flooding. And then our second speaker is Victoria Turner, who's an impact coordinator at Trees for Cities. And she's going to be talking about the impact of school greening work. So I will now introduce our first speaker in a little bit more detail, just to give you a bit of background. So Gianni works in the Flood Estimation Handbook team at UKCEH, and his work focuses on methods and data for flood and rainfall frequency estimation. He's led development of the UK standard FEH 2022 rainfall model, and is currently leading updates to the statistical method for flood frequency estimation, and developing an open access UKCEH flood event data suite. Gianni is also co-creator of the ANaRM model, which is a freely available hydrological model designed to allow rapid comparisons of different runoff mitigation effects that can be achieved through modifying our urban land use. So I will hand over to Gianni now to talk about that very topic. You're on mute at the moment, Gianni.
Sorry, thank you. Is the presentation visible for everybody?
Yes, and it's in presenter mode. So over to you.
Good. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Gianni Vesuviano. This presentation is going to be about how urban flooding can be mitigated through implementing the 330-300 rule. It was done by me along with colleagues from UKCEH, Alice Fitch, Daniel Owen, David Fletcher, and Laurence Jones, as part of the Regreen project, which was a multidisciplinary, multinational project on nature-based solutions funded through the European Commission's Horizon 2020 program. So this talk is based on a paper that was published about 6 months ago in Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. The QR code for the paper is on the right of this slide and will appear at the end of the presentation in case you don't get it now. So 330-300, what is it? It's a set of rules or guidelines to increase urban tree planting and green space provision that was created by Cecil Cananendijk in 2021. And it consists of 3 parts. The first being that urban residents should be able to see 3 mature trees from their windows. The second being that they should live in a neighborhood with 30% canopy cover or more. And third, that they should be 300 meters or less to the nearest green space of at least a hectare in area. This is now rapidly gaining popularity among city planners, governments, and NGOs. It's quite simple to understand, and it's quite easy to measure your progress against the rule. And so it can serve as good guidelines if your particular urban area doesn't have the resources to develop its own bespoke plan. This rule was created mainly with mental and physical well-being in mind, but we know that trees and green spaces can provide many other ecosystem service benefits. And with the rapid increase in interest in this rule, it's going to be important to quantify all these different benefits. So the objective of this study was to focus specifically on one benefit of green space and tree planting, which is urban runoff. And for this, we had 3 European cities to use as case studies. We used the ANaRM hydrological/runoff model, which was created earlier in the same Regreen project. And we considered 2 land cover scenarios for each city, one representing the land use as it is now, and another representing an arrangement that meets the 330-300 guidelines. So the 3 study areas we had from left to right on this map were the Paris region in France, the Aarhus municipality in Denmark, and Grad Velika Gorica in Croatia. I won't go into too much detail on the land cover scenarios, as last month's presentation in this series, given by Daniel Owen, one of the co-authors of this study, does go into a lot more detail on the scenarios and how they were created. But the basic rule behind it is to add grassland and trees in order to meet the 3 components of tree visibility, canopy cover, and accessible green space. The QR code on this slide will take you to last month's Regreen Network Plus presentation, where these scenarios are described in more detail. And also pointing out that these scenarios are available on Zenodo at the moment. So Aarhus municipality, the study area was 471 square kilometers. And in order to achieve the 330-300 rule, it required some increase in grassy areas, a much smaller increase in tree planting. And this was mainly achieved by converting agricultural land around the edges of the urban area, as you can see from the middle of these maps. Velika Gorica is a much smaller study area of just 42 square kilometers because it's a much smaller city. Similarly to Aarhus, the 330-300 scenario was achieved by mainly conversions from agricultural land to grassland. But because it's a much smaller city, these conversions don't actually amount to much in terms of square kilometers converted. Paris was a little different. Like the other two cities, the main conversion was to grassland with slightly less conversion to trees. But in Paris, this was mainly achieved by converting buildings and mineral surfaces like roads and car parks throughout the entire area rather than just around the edges. The runoff model that we used was, as I said earlier, ANaRM, which stands for Adapted Nature-Based Solutions Rational Method. This was fully published in a landscape and urban planning paper in 2023. The QR code on top of the paper will take you to that particular paper. It's based around the rational method, but it also uses a high resolution grid of land uses so that if a particular area is changed from one land use to another, the runoff coefficients for that area are changed. It's combined with a digital elevation model of each of the cities so that flow essentially travels down flow paths and can accumulate as it goes down the flow paths. It also models attenuation if a flow path passes through a water body. And the main purpose of the ANaRM model is to allow rapid comparison of two different land use scenarios. So in our case, it's the land use as it is now, and this one arrangement of land use for each city that does meet the 330-300 guidelines. In terms of results, we found in all three cities that localized runoff could be reduced by over 70% over small areas. The greatest reductions occurring where buildings or mineral surfaces were changed to trees, and then also significant but lesser reductions where they're converted to a grassland use. Because ANaRM accumulates down the flow path network, you can see these reductions continuing as you work down through larger catchments, although becoming lesser as the scales of the interventions relative to the subcatchments become smaller. Paris, because it was a city where the most interventions were required over the most areas, it means that that city had the greatest runoff reductions for a given size of subcatchment compared to the other two cities. And in Paris, some runoff reductions of more than 10% were seen in some catchments more than 10 square kilometers in size. This shows us that implementing 330-300 has the greatest benefits on urban flooding for neighborhoods that are the furthest from meeting the targets. And this is because they require more interventions and therefore you get more benefits from the additional interventions. The flip side of this is that neighborhoods that are already close to meeting the targets don't require much intervention, don't see as big of a benefit over their current case, but their current case is already at less risk of pluvial flooding. And so this means that the flood risk between different neighborhoods is made more equal, but it also means that flood risk is reduced by in all neighborhoods by more or less. And it means that there's a reduction in flood risk across the entire city scale as well. Perhaps counterintuitively, the conversions to grass had a greater effect on mitigating urban flooding than conversions to trees. But this is simply a consequence of the fact that a lot more land use was converted to grassy areas than to trees in these scenarios. One thing about needing parks of a hectare or larger within 300 meters of every resident is that implementing these scenarios could extend the urban footprint, as every building that's removed, the contents of that building need to go somewhere, whether that's into buildings that remain or on top of like building upwards or below existing buildings, or building completely new buildings around the edge of cities. That's a case where implementing the scenarios might actually extend the urban footprint. One thing that's specific to Paris is that many parks were smaller than a hectare in the current land use, and therefore they wouldn't count in the 330-300 rule because they're too small. So some research would need to be done on the mental and physical well-being aspects or advantages of these smaller parks to see if there really is a need to convert so much of Paris's land use into new, larger parks. One thing we found in the paper that this presentation is based on was various citations that showed that for a given green area, a given size of green area, up to a point, the more fragmented it is, the greater effect it has on reducing urban runoff, which again suggests that smaller parks might be more useful than larger parks overall for reducing urban runoff if they both have the same total size. All right, so 330-300, as I said, the main focus on it was physical and mental well-being, but there are other green interventions whose main focus is reducing urban runoff. So if you want to improve well-being and flood risk at the same time, it becomes important to look for overlaps between SUDS and the 330-300 rules. So unfortunately, a lot of different SUDS components don't help to achieve 330-300. In the case of swales and filter strips, it's because they're too small really to count towards 300. In the case of permeable paving, it's because it quite often doesn't have any green area with it. Some exceptions are that street trees can contribute to being the 3 trees you can see through your window and the 30% neighborhood canopy cover. Large infiltration basins can also act as large accessible green spaces on the condition that after they've collected the water, they empty of water quickly, because if there's standing water in them, then they're not accessible green space. Again, very large green roofs could potentially contribute to providing large accessible green spaces. For example, the Jardin Atlantique in Paris is one of these, but given the sheer size of it, there's very few roofs that could support being a green space of over a hectare. And then ponds and wetlands can contribute to the 30% canopy cover, depending exactly on how 30% and canopy is defined. There is some flexibility in implementing the 30 rule for climates or situations where it's impractical for the entire 30% to be met by trees, meaning it can be met by other types of green and blue space in these situations, and that's how ponds and wetlands could contribute. Further work is definitely required from this study. Initially, we were only able to study these three cities in Europe. They all have a temperate climate with no dry season. So in order to make this work more globally relevant, we'd also need to study cities that have different types of climate. We also only studied one 330-300 scenario per city, whereas in reality, there's effectively infinite ways you could arrange new trees and green spaces to meet these rules. The overall headline finding that the most built up areas benefit the most, that would be unaffected by the exact arrangement of the new green spaces and trees. We also assumed that new green spaces were 100% grass, and this is realistic probably as an initial guess, but as these new green spaces mature, the trees within them will mature, and they should provide more urban flood mitigation as time goes on versus what was modeled here. We also assumed that all agricultural areas were inaccessible, and this is because we couldn't find any information otherwise. In the event that some big fields are accessible green spaces, they would not need to be converted. They could be left as they are. And then also, we were not able to model infiltration or detention basins. ANaRM could theoretically model these by modifying the digital elevation map model of the cities in order to lower these areas relative to their surroundings, but we didn't have the time or budget to do this in this particular study. So in summary, the 330-300 rule is a guideline for increasing urban tree planting and green space provision. It's rapidly gaining interest among city planners, governments, and NGOs. And because of this, research is needed to quantify not just the benefits for well-being, but also the multiple other benefits that it could bring. With this in mind, this was a world-first study into how meeting the 330-300 rule could mitigate urban flooding using 3 European cities as case studies. From this, we found that the 330-300 interventions could reduce localized runoff by 70% or more, and that the greatest flood risk reductions occurred in the most built-up areas. However, the number and size of the interventions required to meet these rules did not give large-scale citywide mitigation, as opposed to significant mitigation in certain neighborhoods. One thing that we do suggest as a way forward is infiltration or detention basins that can help to meet the 300 aspect of providing large accessible green spaces while also accumulating water from all around, and therefore providing larger scale mitigation than some of the other solutions that were considered in this particular study. So finally, I'd like to thank you for listening and showing again the QR code to the paper that this presentation is based on. And if you have any comments or questions or just want to discuss it further, my email address, giaves@ceh.ac.uk, is just there to the left of the QR code. Thank you again for listening.
Thank you very much, Gianni, for a fascinating talk. Please, if you've got questions for Gianni, can you put them in the Q&A? So if you look at the top, you've got a Q&A function. So put your questions in there. And do you mind stop sharing, Gianni?
Okay, I will stop sharing now.
And I'll now introduce Victoria. So Victoria works in the impact team at Trees for Cities, and Trees for Cities are the only UK charity working at national scale to improve lives by planting trees, specifically in cities. So the Trees for Cities work involves working with local communities to cultivate lasting change in their neighbourhoods, whether it's revitalising forgotten spaces, creating healthier environments, or just getting people excited about growing, foraging and eating healthy food. For the past 3 years, Victoria has been monitoring and evaluating the impact of Trees for Cities work, so collecting and analysing data from thousands of attendees at community planting days and school workshops, and with a focus on schools, she's been interviewing pupils and teachers involved in school greening projects. So today, her talk discusses how Trees for Cities has been empowering students and connecting them to nature through the school greening programme. So I will hand over to you, Victoria, and we can see your presentation fine.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I am Victoria Turner. As mentioned, I work at Trees for Cities, monitoring and evaluating all our projects. And I'm going to be talking about empowering school students to lead green change. And it's going to be based on a case study from one of the schools we've worked at. And I wanted to start with a bit of an anecdote. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking to someone about the state of nature and the environment in the UK. And the person I was talking to said to me that the problem is that young people today don't care about the environment and they don't care about nature, so what hope is there? And I felt like I had to very quickly correct them, because that's not my experience of speaking to young people and working with young people, and that's not what we see in our schools programme at Trees for Cities and in the wider literature around topics like eco-anxiety and young people's desire to take action. I often find that the problem isn't that they don't care, because they do care very much, but they just feel powerless to enact change. And that's why I want to tell you a bit about our school programme and how, through co-designing green spaces with young people and for young people, we're building that confidence to take action and giving them the autonomy and empowering them to feel like they can create real change in their own environments. So you've already heard this, but a bit about Trees for Cities, just to recap. We're the only UK charity working at a national scale to improve lives by planting trees in cities. We work across the UK, transforming urban areas and engaging people with nature through tree planting and urban greening programmes. Our award-winning work in schools is very delivery focused, and it involves transforming school grounds into greener and healthier places to be. We really specialise in innovative design, high quality planting and landscaping, and inclusive engagement of the whole school community. Our aim is to get everybody involved and stuck in to hopefully reap the benefits that getting involved with nature can bring. So why does green space in school matter? Every day, an estimated 3.1 million children in England attend schools where the air surrounding them is over the WHO's recommended limits for PM 2.5. Schools can often be concrete jungles with very little green space and a lot of grey, and in urban areas, there's often not accessible green space nearby that they can use to play or do sports in. This means that schools can be very hot environments in summer, flooded in winter, and subject to air pollution all year round. I actually visited a school last year who were really keen to put up green screens because they were situated in a construction zone and next to the DLR trains, meaning that particulate matter and brake dust was billowing onto the school. And while green infrastructure isn't the only solution here, it can provide some much needed respite. Particularly as research shows that exposure to green space can have a myriad of wellbeing benefits. It can reduce behavioural problems, give children a cognitive boost, and it might even lead to improved academic achievement. So there's loads of benefits, environmental, social. So the case study I'm going to talk to you about today is Elthorne Park High School. It's a secondary school in Ealing and part of our Trees in Schools programme. And the goal there was to work with the school's eco club to design a greening project and plant it with the wider school. As you can see, the school was looking quite grey before. The data for this presentation comes from pupil focus groups and teacher interviews that we collected visiting the school after they'd built, designed, and had been using the project space. And we try and get out to a number of our schools to do this, to continually collect this data. So you might see woven in some bits of data and information from other schools just to illustrate some of the impacts. So a key element of engaging children with our school programme that we've introduced in recent years is the co-design process. This is where we work collaboratively with pupils and teachers to create a really bespoke space. The co-design process takes away the top-down structure of an organisation, just going into a school and imposing something for the pupils that they haven't had a say in. It's really important for us that our spaces are engaged with, used by, and looked after by the whole school community, particularly the pupils. So it's really crucial that we have their buy-in from the start and create a space that's meaningful for them and fulfills their needs as a school. So as a result of that, pupils are key stakeholders and decision makers in these co-design projects. So what we do when co-designing a space is we will go into the school with our design and engagement teams, and we will show students some reference images to let them know what could be possible on their school grounds. Particularly for primary schools, we don't want to just go in and overwhelm students by sitting them down in a room and asking them to design a green space with no inspiration, ideas, or parameters of what's possible. So these reference images can provide that inspiration and guidance. We'll often look at their school playground on a visit beforehand and come up with these inspiration photos, as well as perhaps some recommended plants or trees that could be suitable for their needs, whether that's shade or colour or sensory needs. The next step in co-designing spaces with school students is creating an illustrated map of the school. So we will give them a bird's eye diagram of their school, and we'll ask the pupils to draw, scribble, annotate anything they want to see on their school using the sort of reference images as a base. So here in the top right, we can see one of our schools wanted a tree-lined walkway going into their forest garden. Another school wanted flower beds and a shady area in the centre, or a sort of bench set up with trees providing shade and a wildflower meadow nearby. So for Elthorne Park High School, this was a bit different because it was a secondary school. So when we arrived at the school, the pupils had already made a presentation and a sort of pitch to us of what they wanted. One of the pupils had made a map of the school with proposed planting areas, which was really helpful. So they'd already put in perhaps recommended areas. They put in areas that needed development, where there'd been planters where plants had died. So it was really interesting to see what they wanted from the project. They also gave us a slide with ideas for planting on the site. And from this, we were able to plan the type of species and planting that we could include in the school. The pupils really wanted quiet zones, rejuvenation of empty spaces like old planters and trees for wildlife. They also wanted trees for interest, so ones that looked really nice. But the most important topic that came up when in discussion with these pupils was that they really wanted to help nature and wildlife, and they really wanted to attract mini beasts and pollinators to the school environment. There are, of course, some requests we couldn't facilitate at the school due to project budget or the infrastructure of the school. So they really wanted a living roof and fruit trees, but this wasn't quite possible at the site. And our design team will always discuss this with the pupils and make sure they have a conversation with them about why that might not be feasible and any alternatives they suggest. We always want to make sure that this is a two-way process and the pupils are involved in these decisions. We won't just say, no, we can't do that, or ignore the request. We like to talk them through it because it's part of that education about implementing green infrastructure and designing these project spaces. So from their map that they'd created and the list of what they want, we came up with a design for the school and a planting plan for the species we could include. So we were putting in flowers that are attractive to pollinators for their quiet zone. We're putting in trees and hedgerow plants for wildlife, shade-tolerant plants for empty planters, where plants had previously been planted by the school, but they died because they weren't suitable for the conditions. We also planted wildflowers to make a sort of wild tree meadow and a mix of evergreen and deciduous shrubs to create colourful areas of interest throughout the school. So there was a lot of variety in what we were planting, and that was really driven by the pupils and the different sort of zones they wanted to create. So what was the result of co-designing this space with the young people at Elthorne Park High School? Well, from the outset, the project was very collaborative, with students given the tools to shape the space themselves. And over the course of several months, they planted trees and shrubs to transform their playground and learn about the benefits of urban green spaces. This hands-on approach was very much a departure from a secondary curriculum that's often difficult to integrate with outdoor learning. You can see here some quotes from pupils. One of them said that you probably wouldn't even cover the same topics in the classroom in the first place. It's more interactive, you can see the features in more detail. And another said that a lot of things that should be covered in the classrooms aren't. It's something that you wouldn't get the opportunity to learn about otherwise. They really enjoyed the process of going outside to learn about the space, learn about the environment, do some tree identification, and plan what was possible, and then actually getting to build that project. It wasn't just about getting plants in the ground, but it was about building ownership and a sense of pride about the space. And our hands-on approach has really helped them to do that. Another impact that came out of the discussions from pupils and school staff was that as students began to work on the space, some perceptions of nature shifted. So what was once described as just a big grass patch with a few trees and then dead leaves now became a space that students wanted to spend time in. Staff and students said that the area is regularly used during break and lunch times, not just for hanging out, but for feeling grounded and peaceful. One of the staff noted that when we put the spaces in, pupils naturally started to gravitate to these greener areas to have conversations or just to sit and have some time out. So they were really using the spaces from the get-go. The planting season at the school included members of the Eco Club and the wider school community, encouraging pupils who didn't enjoy classroom learning to get involved with the project and do something different. So when we asked how the space made them feel, pupils told us that they felt happy, calm and proud, and that they were glad to have played a part in making the project happen. So as I mentioned, whilst many of the pupils that were part of the project already cared about nature, we also engaged those who perhaps hadn't thought about it much or who didn't consider themselves an environmentalist. Our focus group with the pupils showed that engaging the students in this very active hands-on environment helped to shift some of their perceptions. So we've got some more great quotes from pupils here. One of them said that they didn't care about the planet or anything or nature, but then after the planting days, they felt like they kind of cared more and are appreciating it a lot more. One said, I thought it was kind of weird, to be honest, and then I've done it and it was just like peaceful and calming. And this pupil had actually not been involved with the project and been roped in to do the planting, really enjoyed it, and as a result joined the Eco Club and became an eco ambassador at their school. So this just shows how getting pupils to do something a bit different and having that sort of inclusive approach can help them to find a bit more purpose in their sort of time at school. One of the most prominent impacts that arose from the project was the way in which the students themselves were able to take ownership of the space, with pupils and staff both reporting that it was a very empowering process. While the Eco Club had done some fruit and veg planting previously in smaller areas of the school, and they had a clear idea of what they wanted out of the project, with our help, they were able to draw up plans and turn these ideas into action. And I think that can be very empowering for a young person who's often told that they can't do this and they can't do that. So we can give these students the autonomy to help create a space they really like, whilst also keeping the practical side of things in check by working with school staff and the lead teachers appointed to the project to make sure that the whole school community knows how to use the space and what it's for. We really want these spaces to be used by everyone and not just those who are potentially more connected to nature. So that's why we'll do staff training and more inclusive engagement sessions at our schools. The staff said that they didn't think a project like this would be possible on such a large scale, but actualising it with the pupils and us as a partnership really helped them to sort of conceptualise a project and see it grow. And the pupils really enjoyed being able to turn their anxiety and their sort of desire to be involved with helping the environment into action. And they really found that they enjoyed setting an example and getting their hands dirty. The staff involved in the project noted a number of knock-on effects that the project had on the school, namely that they received a Green Flag Award as a result of the Trees for Cities project, and that 2 staff members were able to use the project as evidence for them becoming sustainability leads at the school, meaning they could incentivise and promote more environmentally conscious behaviours. One of the staff said that your project facilitated other kind of splinter projects that will now have their own momentum as a result. That's huge. And while many of the students involved in the project were already very environmentally conscious, the project has helped them to feel like they're leading by example, turning that awareness into action and helping their local environment, whilst also inspiring others throughout the process. So, why is co-creating green spaces for young people so important? Well, this Trees in Schools project at Elthorne Park High School is a really good example of what can happen when young people are just trusted to lead, get their hands dirty, and connect with the environment around them. It's not just about putting the trees in the ground, it's about growing confidence, ownership, and a culture of sustainability in the school that these projects can foster. Allowing pupils to have control over their environment and what they're doing is hugely empowering for them. And it means that they keep up looking after the space and they want to tell others about the great work they're doing. I'd just like to end on a quote from another teacher at one of our schools that sums up what it's like for young people to be involved in these co-designed projects. They said that if you're part of something that's really powerful and you can actively see that what you're doing is making a change in the school, that's huge. What confidence that can give them to do other things. So, yeah, they're really lovely, empowering projects, and I really recommend checking out more of our Trees for Cities work in schools. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Victoria. So two really interesting talks. So we'll move to the Q&A session now, and I'll start with a question for Gianni, but please put questions in the Q&A chat function. So Gianni, are there any ongoing projects that you know of studying 330, 300? And I'm guessing the question's about the hydrology aspect in other cities.
Right. In terms of the hydrology aspect itself, I'm not aware of any others. I think this was the first one. In terms of 330, 300 as a whole, it's rapidly gaining interest. I've seen plenty of other studies considering different aspects of 330, 300, including implementation of it. I'm aware of a study from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre that evaluated how well basically every city in Europe is doing at meeting the 330, 300 rules. And they found that a very small percentage of the population of Europe actually lives in areas where they can see 3 trees from their window, do have 30% canopy cover, and are 300 meters or less away from the nearest green space. It's like a simple search on different academic databases will show that there's been a lot of interest in 330-300 over the last couple of years. In terms of cities, I'm aware that Nice is actively trying to implement 330-300 within the city at the moment, for example. I'm aware that the Nordic Council of Ministers also had a look at how the Nordic countries were doing relative to 330-300, and did try to set up initiatives for Nordic cities themselves if they wanted to meet 330-300, initiatives to help them to meet them.
Thank you, Gianni. I might ask a follow-up question to that, actually. So I thought your sort of your analysis at the end of how typically hydrologically focused interventions in cities didn't really tie in with the sort of 330-300 rule at all. So to be honest, most of the sort of SUDS type and hydrology type features didn't really fit within 330-300. So do you see that as a problem? Do you what's the solution? Do we need to have a wider interpretation of what 330-300 might mean?
Well, there are a couple of exceptions, like street trees, for example, would contribute very much to the being able to see trees from your window. I did suggest that possibly infiltration or detention basins could be used as large green areas. And if they're able to get rid of the water they've collected quite quickly, then they become accessible quite quickly after they've done their job from a hydrological point of view. So I think those are two ways that you could implement SUDS and meet 330-300 at the same time, or at least help to.
Okay, thank you. So got a couple of questions for Victoria. So first one is, could you give some information on other projects that Trees for Cities is involved in?
Yeah, so we do a number of different projects. We have a street tree sponsorship scheme that sort of blends public and private finance, so people can sponsor a tree to be planted on their street in conjunction with councils. We have an urban forest programme, which is very much planting trees in urban towns and cities. So we'll work in parks, open green spaces across the country to plant trees. And these are often community events. So we'll get local residents to come along and help plant the trees in their local green space. And the hope with this is that they then have like a higher degree of buy-in with the green space, they're more engaged with it, and they're more keen to look after the trees. And these are very sort of educational sessions. So we see increased connectedness to nature, improved knowledge and skills, and improved confidence, as well as quite a high number of attendees wanting to plant, protect, or promote trees in the next year. We are running a Trees for Climate Action project up in Bradford and Glasgow, and that's all about engaging local communities with trees. We're running 2 traineeships up there to get young people involved in the sector. We're also doing a traineeship in London. We do intergenerational work, so getting sort of older and younger residents together, working together to plant trees. We do tree ID walks, we do tree festivals, we do community maintenance sessions. We do a lot of different things, but we work all across the UK with council partners or other charities, all with the aim of improving lives by planting trees in cities. And we're just entering a new strategic period, so hopefully more exciting new pilots coming up.
That's an impressive list. I quite like the idea of people being able to sponsor trees in collaboration with their local council. Is that quite a recent thing? What's the take up on that like?
So we've been doing Trees for Streets for a number of years. I don't know the exact number, but it's one of our sort of more recent initiatives, and it's sort of like a tech for good scheme. So we have a platform. Councils will get put on the platform. We will have sort of partnership meetings with them, and once they've agreed to be on the platform, then local residents can sponsor a tree. We have a really good uptake of that. We're sort of constantly getting new councils onboarded, and people sort of fundraising for trees in their areas. It's a really nice way to sort of bring the community together, because residents will club together with people on their street and they'll do sort of fundraising activities. And we also get some private finance from businesses who might want to sponsor a tree by their office, but then also sponsor a tree in a more deprived area, because a lot of our work does take place in these sort of areas of multiple deprivation. So we'll often get joint sponsorship for those. Yeah, it's really great scheme.
Do people know where their tree is?
Yeah, so we'll work with the residents. So the residents will be there when the tree is planted. They can choose the location, and then our team sort of goes in and the council might ground truth it just to check that it's a suitable location. So no overhead cables, not too close to people's houses, not like interrupting any groundwork. So yeah, they'll know exactly where their tree is and they can pinpoint it on a map. And we also encourage the people who've sponsored the tree to become watering champions and look after that tree and keep it healthy throughout the summer months. Because big standard trees do need a few years of sort of maintenance and aftercare to be successful.
And how do you choose what species it is? Do the people choose that, or the council, or somewhere in between?
So I think it's a bit of in between. I'm not sure fully, but I'm pretty sure that if you sponsor that tree, you can then sort of suggest what species you'd like, and the council will sort of work around that. For our urban forest projects, the species are chosen by our design team, and they'll be based on site specifications. So is it a flood risk site? Is it a site that needs to increase biodiversity? Is it for noise pollution? So when we're doing it sort of for our larger park or green space projects, we'll really think about what that individual site needs, what's suitable, and we'll have consultations with residents to check that they're okay with it and they're happy with the trees planted.
Well, that's fascinating. And then I guess a related question is, how are schools selected for your schools program? How many schools have you got involved so far?
So there's been a lot of schools involved. I'm going to say last year we had 35 new builds. So we have a build year and an engagement year. The build year is when we'll go in, do the planting, build the raised beds, the green infrastructure, and an engagement year comes after, where our team goes in, trains up the teachers, trains up the pupils, and sort of gets everyone engaged with planting trees or planting plants. And I think we had 35 new builds last year. I'm not sure about this year yet, but I know that we engaged 22,000 pupils and staff in these projects. We gave them greener playgrounds. And we select schools sort of in a number of ways. So it might be that a school reaches out to us wanting a greener playground. It might be that the council reaches out to us. But the way we select a lot of our projects is through mapping. So we might look at things like tree equity score. We are sort of pivoting more towards 330, 300 as well at the moment, but we'll do sort of QGIS mapping of areas of multiple deprivation, areas that have flood risk, heat risk, air pollution, and we'll sort of we form priority areas out of that, and we will approach those priority areas and ask them if they want a project, and often the answer is yes. So yeah, it's really done on like priority and need. So we work in a lot of areas that have sort of disproportionate lack of access to green space, or are very built up, or areas of multiple deprivation.
And I had a follow-on question around how you choose who to engage with in the school. So I don't know how many pupils there were in the Elthorn example, but typically secondary schools have got 1,000+ pupils. So how do you kind of get input, I guess get buy-in across a lot of pupils in quite a wide age range?
So at Elthorn in particular, we work with their eco team. They have an eco club at their school, and they were really keen to sort of take action. And the eco club actually did assemblies throughout the school years. They had a green week, and they presented on the trees in schools project that Trees for Cities was doing, sort of encourage others. And then we have our planting days, where sort of whichever class has availability will come out. I think for Elthorn, it was primarily the Eco Club, and then we also engaged pupils who might have been kicked out of lessons, or those who just typically struggle in a classroom setting. We often find that our projects are really suitable for these pupils because they're very sort of sensory experiences. Putting your hands in soil is very grounding and calming. So it's actually a great way to engage pupils who perhaps don't cope so well in quite a restrained classroom environment. So often we'll work with Senko groups in schools, the Eco Club. In our primary school work, we usually work with like year 3 and year 4 so that they can year 5 and year 6 see that. But because we upskill the teachers, we encourage them to take lessons outside. So in a primary school setting, we will go and do a whole staff training. We give them resources and teach them how to use the garden. And we'll give them resources on how to do a maths lesson, perhaps outside in the garden where they collect the fruit they've grown, and they might use tomatoes and measure that out to learn how to make a tomato sauce. So they're sort of combining the practical learning with the division. How many tomatoes do you need? How much of this do you need? Or art or science is a good one to get them out there. So yeah, we'll really try and get the whole school community engaged, and we'll do a whole school assembly as well to everyone so that they know what these people are doing in their school and who's helping out.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess all this information's on your website, is it?
Yes, please do
If
check
people
us
want to
out.
find out more.
Yeah, and you can email info@treesforcities.org to find out more or to get any of our contact details.
Okay. Can I come back to you, Gianni, as well, with the perhaps a little bit more of a theoretical question? So you mentioned, in the Paris example, in the sort of definition of 300 parks under 1 hectare don't count as part of the 300, and you mentioned this idea that sort of fragmented urban landscapes in some ways give better overall protection from surface flooding. Do you mind sort of expanding on that idea a little bit?
So, yeah, in Paris, there's a lot of parks within the urban area that are smaller than the size of park in the 330-300 rule that counts as a park. So effectively, they, in terms of implementing the 330-300 rule, they don't count, but they do exist, and they are presumably providing benefits of multiple ecosystem services. So it's important to study that further to see if the benefits that are being provided, how much benefit is being provided, how much extra benefit would be provided by extending them to a hectare, or whether or not it's worth doing, because in the center of Paris it's not massively feasible to knock down huge amounts of buildings.
Is it? And I guess with the ANaRM model, you could probably test these kind of ideas. So you could have the same area of green space in a single patch in a subcatchment versus multiple smaller patches. Is that something that you've sort of tested at all or interested to try?
It's not something that we tested in this study. This study only compared current land use against one particular proposed land use, but it would be possible given that the ANaRM model works at the same resolution as the input data, which in this case is 5 meters. It's possible to implement green spaces as small as 25 square meters, or obviously any size bigger than that, going up in 25 square meter increments. So yes, it would be possible and interesting to compare what kind of urban flood mitigation you get from, say, adding a kilometre of new green space as 100 hectare parks, or as 200 half hectare parks, or 400 quarter hectare parks, and so on.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking of, again, sort of the sort of wider focus of Reclaim on some of these knowledge gaps around green space. And previous speaker, Charlotte Glazier, and her work on pocket parks. And I think the functional performance of pocket parks, if you like, in terms of a wide range of services and well-being benefits, I think is perhaps understudied. So I think it'd be useful to, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence from a lot of the speakers we've had in this webinar series that these spaces are really valuable, but we don't know quite so much about how they perform for some of these sort of co-benefits that we get. I think that would be something interesting to follow up with, just generally. Well, thank you both very much for 2 really interesting talks, and if you want to get in touch with them, please do, and sort of follow up on their website or links they've provided. Just to give a little bit more info about our next webinar. So that's on 6th of August, and we've got, again, 2 very good speakers, so giving slightly different perspectives. We have Ed Stannard, who's the Executive Director for Parks for London, talking about the work they do. And then a sort of joint presentation by 2 people from the Royal Society for Arts, Manufacturing and Commerce, talking about playful green planet. So again, that sort of follows on nicely from Victoria's talk today about sort of getting young people involved in green space and understanding it and interacting with it. And then this is just a signpost to some of the social media areas where Reclaim's involved, and where you can find out more about the network, previous speakers, by going to the YouTube channel and find out. And this particular presentation will also be uploaded to that in the next day or so when the recording's finished. So thank you everyone for joining, and thanks once again for 2 very interesting talks today, and I'll hope you'll join us next month.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.